If you've always admired miniatures but thought they were too hard to make, you are going to love this project. I'm going to show a cool trick to make these teeny tiny fairy houses complete with lots of sweet detail. If you love fantasy and imagination and want to be inspired and grow in your creativity, you're in the right place. Hi there, Sandy here. Welcome to another Polymer clay tutorial at keepsakecrafts.net. So the cool trick for getting really nice detail very quickly and easily in our tiny fairy houses is to use a detailed texture sheet like this. You want to choose something with lots of fine detail and interesting shapes that are on a scale with what you're creating. This is a texture sheet I designed in conjunction with CreateAlong, and I had just this kind of thing in mind. Lots of small areas that would show up as detail on small projects, like these little fairy houses. And I will link in the description box below and in the blog post where you can find this. What you don't want to use is a texture sheet with a scale that's too big. This is one I showed you how to do in a previous video. I will link to it. But you can see if you're going to make something this size, these are just way too big. If you're planning on painting your project, you could actually just make it out of scrap clay. But I am going to use the color of the clay, so I have a metallic here. But first, let's get our texture on. Since this is a silicone texture sheet, you don't need to add a release. This clay has been rolled out on a number 3 on my Atlas pasta machine, which is just under 2 millimeters thick. I'm going to lay that on there, add a piece of paper, and then start using my fingers to press all over. I just want to get it pressed down enough into the texture so that it holds onto it. Once you have your texture locked down into the clay, go ahead and grab something flat. Another tile will work, an acrylic block. And you just want to use this to really press, but pressing evenly all over. You just want to be careful that you don't shift it and create a double impression. And I'm standing up and putting a fair amount of pressure on here. Let's see how we did. Not bad. I've actually gotten deeper impressions, but that will do. Now you'll need some kind of form to build your house on. You can do anything you want. I suggest starting with something easy, which would be something round and straight-sided. If it's tapered at an angle, like I thought of using this Armor All cap, but it's got a taper and it just makes it trickier. It can be done, but let's keep it easy for the moment. So this is just a piece of a wooden dowel. This is another plastic cap. You can see it doesn't have to be able to go in the oven. And this is a skinnier wooden dowel, a 1/4 inch wooden dowel. And what you can see that I've done with all of these is just wrap them in some paper. And these will give you, of course, different sizes of houses. Like this long, tall one was done on the dowel. To wrap your form, you'll just need to cut a strip of paper the same height as the form. And this is just some scrapbooking adhesive. You don't want to use tape here because tape kind of melts in the oven and the clay will stick to it and it's gooey and it's just not good. Make sure you put your adhesive right up to the very edge of that part of the paper that's going to overlap. And then just wrap it. And there you go. Now we're ready to cover this with clay. When I designed this texture sheet, I had in mind projects like this where I would want to choose areas that I wanted to use. So for example, this little ripply section is what covers most of this little house. I just liked that idea. You can choose whatever section makes you happy. I think I want to include this area over here, so we'll cut couple clean edges, mostly clean edges. Cut the strip to the same height. Then wrap your form, and you want to put that seam somewhere towards the back. It's never a good idea to have seams on top of each other. So have the seam of the paper not where the seam of the clay is. And then just like when you are covering a cane, you wrap and then let that clay make a mark. You're going to cut just slightly inside that mark. It's easier to get them to meet neatly if they're a little short than if they're too long. Because you can stretch it a little, and I'm just kind of gently easing it with my fingers until those two edges are going to meet. And then to seal that seam, what I like to do is look at the design. Now it looks like I've smoothed out some of my design here, but look at the design and try to make it carry over across the seam. So like here's this line. So I'm just going to use my tool and maybe kind of draw that, especially if some of this got smoothed out. So I'm just going to smooth that this way, and like there's this line. So you can like continue sculpting using the lines of texture that are already in the clay. You can add more details, like I'm just adding a few dots here. You could put pieces on, little balls of clay. I've got all these straight lines here. You could come in and even deepen those lines and enhance them if you want. I'm just going to kind of blend that. And once we add our paints and patinas, you'll hardly be able to tell where the seam was. Take a look at this one. The seam was right down here, and I kind of just continued the lines of the designs and smoothed it out until it was pretty well camouflaged. For the door, I have some clay that I rolled out on a number 6 of my pasta machine, which is just under 1 millimeter. And you can use this tool, just add some lines for, I might squiggle some of them, add some lines for wood grain. Now that I've got my wood grain, I'm just going to cut whatever shape I want. I'm going to make that a little more like that. There we go. For my door. Put that in place. Let's see, there's my seam. So I'm going to put it pretty much opposite. And again, you might want to use the designs on the texture sheet. And if it's too tall, that's okay. Just put it on where you want it. And then you can trim off the excess. Isn't that cute? You can also cut little windows. This is a 3/16 inch Kemper cutter set. And maybe I'll cut a couple round windows. Well, this one has one oval window, and that was cut with the 3/8 inch Kemper cutter set. You could also just freehand windows if you want. Now, if you're afraid that you're going to mush this up, you can definitely bake it at this point and then come back in and add details after it's baked. But I'm just going to carry on. I'm going to roll some of this into little tiny logs of clay. An acrylic block really helps you get nice, small, even logs, and I'm going to use these to make the mutton strips. Whoops. That's why it's nice to have a long piece, because it kind of gives you a handle. Come on, there we go. And I can use this tool. This, by the way, is a great tool. It is a dental, not a dentist, but a dental tool. You'll find them with the dental floss called a gum stimulator. This will melt in the heat of the oven. Ask me how I know. So what I did was I made a handle with some polymer clay on a pen barrel, but then to attach this is air dry clay, epoxy clay. And it's just a great tiny little fine detail tool. I probably could have made these strips a little smaller for these tiny little windows, but you get the idea. I found it's easiest to put it on long rather than trying to cut a piece that's exactly the right size. Put it on long and then trim it to fit. The door looks more like it belongs on there and less like it was just stuck on there if you add a little log of clay around it as well. And you know, my eyesight isn't great, and even though these details are tiny, I have so far done all of this without my magnifying light.
If you want to get even more detailed, you can definitely use a magnifying light. Just rolling a little ball for a doorknob. Aww. And then for hinges, I'm going to take this clay and roll it out on the very thinnest setting of my pasta machine, a number 9, which is less than a half a millimeter thick. And I'm just going to cut long, skinny triangles for the hinges. Well, they're not really the hinges, they're kind of the part that you see on the outside of old doors, you know, that ironwork. Kind of like that look. And I'm making it much longer than I need, again, so I have something to hold onto. Trim it away. You don't want. You can remember the thicknesses that I used, just 3, 6, 9. So if you have an atlas, or about 2 millimeters, 1 millimeter, and half a millimeter. Whatever corresponds to your pasta machine. A final detail on these hinges is just a needle tool. By the way, if you're loving this video, thank my patrons. They voted for this topic. And not only that, but without their support, I would not still be making YouTube videos. On your screen, you will see a list of those amazing, wonderful people. You can click the link and see how you can join them. You can trim the windows the same way with little logs of clay, or you can trim the windows by rolling a nice long one and making like a looping vine that goes around and trims the window, which I think is really cute. And then one final detail I added here were some flowers and some mushrooms. Back to our thinnest sheet of clay and the tiny Kemper cutter set, there's a little flower cutter. So just kind of stick it to your surface and then give it a little shake. Boop, and you get these little tiny flowers. Pick it up with a ball tool and just kind of use your fingers and gently ease that around there to give it a shape. And then use the ball tool to place those wherever you want. Twist the tool and the flowers should release, and then you can kind of nudge it and shape it. On this one, you don't really see them now, but once we add some color, you will. On this one, I think I did 6 or 7 little flowers clustered around the door. And then on this side, I have mushrooms, which are super easy. First, roll yourself little tiny stems, and then roll little balls. Again, with the 1/8" ball tool, just press into that ball of clay and kind of form it around. And then place that wherever you want it on your house. Now, if you've already baked your house, you'll want to, of course, put some liquid clay where you're placing these. But sometimes it's so small, with such a small amount of surface contact, the liquid clay helps. So I was like distorting my mushroom, trying to press it on there. So we'll try that again. Fold it back up into a ball, shape it over the tool, and I'll just dip the part that's going to be against the house in the liquid clay. Twist your tool to remove it, and then tuck your stem in, kind of tap that down over the stem, trim off the excess. Cute! And on this one I added a cluster of 3 in different sizes and heights. Once your house is all decorated to your satisfaction, you can bake it, or you can add the roof. It's a little bit easier, of course, to add the roof after baking, but it's up to you. But whatever you do, don't forget to remove your form if it can't be baked. One of the things that makes these little houses so charming are their adorable flower roofs. And this is actually what I had in mind when I designed these flower texture plates. I will link to where you can get them. And by the way, if you want slightly bigger fairy houses, I do have a bigger set that I designed. Clay will stick in these texture plates, so you need a release. My favorite is Armor All. This is rolled out on a number 3, just under 2 millimeters. Just a drop. Put your clay on the textured side of the texture plate, and then start pressing with your fingers from the center out. You don't want to trap any air bubbles. And make sure you've pressed over the entire thing Add a piece of paper and then just roll over with your acrylic roller. Peel that off, and there you go, a wonderful texture, nice and deep. Next, I'm going to use a craft knife to just cut around, trying to have a fairly even, maybe 2 or 3 millimeters outside of this. Now you can adjust this. If you need a flower roof that's slightly bigger, you could cut further outside and add some size to it. If you need it smaller, you could cut inside like these lines and use the smaller part of the design. So this isn't perfectly even, and it doesn't matter. Remove the excess clay, and now you can use some kind of tool to sort of flatten and soften those edges. The ball tool works great. It gives you a decorative design, or you can use a needle tool and add lines on that little extra lip, just to smooth it down, make it more tapered and even. Now you'll notice this is flat. Our roofs are a little bit more cone-shaped. How do we do that? Well, you just need to do a little bit of clay surgery. We're going to cut out some of the petals. Now in this one, you'll notice, although this is a 5-petal design, because I wanted this house to be very cone-shaped, I cut out an entire petal. This one still has 5 petals, but you'll notice one is a bit smaller. You can hardly see it, but I cut out a good portion of this one. So if there's one of the petals that for some reason you don't like as much as the others, that would be a good one to cut out. So you can cut out a wedge like this and bring it together, or you can cut out the whole petal, which is what I'm going to do in this instance. And make sure you cut all the way to the center, just like you were cutting a slice of pizza. And pick this up, and you can leave it right on the paper. It's actually kind of helpful. And meet those cut edges. And also you can start pinching this. Because honestly, one of my favorite parts of this little house is this little pinched up bit here. You get this up off the paper now. That was helpful to support it. Start pinching just in the very center. So you've got a little bit pinched up. Start twirling. You can also add a larger ball tool and kind of start shaping, but try not to wreck your nice texture. If you need to, you can come in with this tool again and try to smooth out that join. And who would ever know that was just a minute ago a 5-petal flower. Whether you're adding this to an already baked house or you're adding it to raw clay, I'm going to try not to get liquid clay on the paper here. If you're adding it to an already baked house, you can just pull out the paper. Put on your roof. Isn't that cute? Shape it as you like. I definitely want to give this a little bit of a little curl. And then bake that. Of course, you finish all your details like your windows and vines and things. To do a roof like this one with lots of layers, which I think is fun, I cut several flowers from the interior here. I don't know how well you can see on camera. This top one is just a very small flower, which is the center of this texture plate. The next largest one down is the flower outside in the ring outside of that, and then so on and so on. And then I shaped them the same way, shaped them over a ball tool, and I tucked some balls of clay underneath to kind of give it some lift. So that's really fun and fanciful. You can finish your fairy houses any way you like. You could make them just with colored clay to begin with, but I chose to use Swelligant metal paints and dye oxides. If you read the directions on the dye oxides, it says to put it over metal or over anything that's been painted with the metal coatings. I did a little testing of that. Here's just a sample piece I made, and I know it's hard to tell. On half of it, I have just the gold clay like I have here, and on the other half, I painted it with the bronze Swelligant coating. And I didn't see a huge difference. So I'll leave it entirely up to you. If you are using scrap clay, then you'll want to paint it with one of these metal colors first as a base layer. But since I use gold clay, I don't need to. Now these are messy. You may want to use gloves. And working on a craft mat like this is really good. It's a silicone craft mat. You can put your dioxides right on the craft mat if you want, but I'm going to put them in bowls just to make it a little bit more tidy. The directions say to shake well before opening, so I'm going to add a couple drops into each bowl. I know this piece doesn't have the roof yet. I just wanted to be able to clearly show you what was going on here. You're going to want a good collection of brushes because, well, you'll see why. I only have these 4 colors, the blue, green, purple, and the white. And I'm especially glad that I have the white because the white can really help change the look of the other colors. So let's start with this blue because it's a really nice blue. And we're just going to drop it right on the baked clay. And you see what happens is that it goes into the grooves and not a lot of it stays on the surface. I noticed that when I was painting on the part of this that had metal that it did stick better. But that doesn't really matter to me because I'm going to go over this with some dry brushing, so I don't need it to be on the surface. So we got some blue, how about some purple? And these are pretty strong colors, as you can see. The green isn't quite so strong. But I really love this chartreusey green. Let's do the door. And it mixes beautifully with that blue. I think this is Caribbean blue? Yeah, Caribbean blue. It makes this lovely teal. But then watch what happens when you add the white. It just kind of makes them start to marble. And now notice this brush has blue and green and purple on it. And when I put it in there, oh, it starts to mix. Which is okay, but you got to be careful not to go getting mud. So that's why I have far more than 4 paintbrushes for 4 colors. And once I put this, see now this has got, is this the one no, this is the one, I don't know. See, and then I start to get confused about which one is which, and so I keep reaching for a clean brush. I just love this look, and it looks like I might want a little more blue. So you can kind of go from the part that's white to a darker shade. I just think they are yummy. Purple's pretty strong, so that's a nice one to tone down a little with some of the blue, some of the white. These do tend to spit when you close them, so you might want to make sure to just put a towel over it. Then you get this pretty purpley blue. I don't know, I need a fresh brush. White. Not pretty. Just have a lot of fun with this. Make them whatever colors suit you. So for this one, I just focused on the green and the blue, and of course my base color was silver. This one I base coated with copper, and then used mostly purple and white, maybe tiny bits of blue. And on this one, I did what I'm doing, you see me doing here, where I had all 3 colors happening. Another trick I figured out, because this green is a much weaker color than the blue and the purple, I started just dripping it on directly. That way I didn't end up muddying my color in the bowls, and that kind of worked well. And yeah, if you don't like having colorful hands, you might want to use gloves. So once you have all the color on there that you want, set it aside to dry completely. The final step that will make your piece look really fantastic is to dry brush over it. And of course you can use anything you like, but I am again using the Swelligant metal coatings. This one is copper. And I know my base is gold, but it doesn't matter really. You can dry brush over with anything you want. So kind of load up your brush and then wipe it on a piece of paper and keep wiping until you pretty much don't see any more paint coming off. And now you can dry brush. That just hits the high points, puts all that color you added into the low points, and finishes it off really nicely, just like I did on these ones. This one in silver, this one in copper, and this one in brass.
Now that you've seen this project, you'll want to check out my Fairy Garden in a Teacup series. It would be the perfect place to add your tiny houses. Happy creating. Bye-bye.